So I'm calling folks who are present: Lisa Salmon, Roger Kirshner, Renee Anderson, Ailey Lowry, Gary Hollins, Hobbs Waters. And then staff: Jordan, Cooper, Alexandra, Martin, and Noberto Delgadillo.
Okay, thank you. Can we review and adopt the minutes from the last meeting? Do I have a motion?
I motion to adopt the minutes from the last meeting.
Thank you, Lisa. Is there a second?
I second it.
Thank you, Renee. So all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Hearing no, any opposed? They stand as written and adopted. Let's move on to.
I have a question.
Okay.
I didn't vote, and I'm not a member of the committee, is my understanding. I'm just the board liaison. So do the board members vote, Jordan? Do you know? I didn't think we did. I thought we were just, but I maybe was supposed to vote, and maybe I'm
Yeah,
just.
it seems like it would be just the committee members, from my understanding. But yeah.
Because I didn't want it to be like I don't care about the minutes, but that's been my understanding is I don't get to vote on this committee because I'm not actually a member. Okay, good.
Oh, no, so that goes for me as well, right?
What?
That goes for me as well, right? Okay.
You can vote if you want, I guess, but we just won't count it.
Okay, gotcha.
You can be on the block
Second.
like me to sit here silent.
Sense competition here. Who second first? Yeah. See a theme.
Yeah, Director Green is not here, so we don't have a ready motion maker. Anyway, let's move on. The next item on the agenda was to address questions and answers that were based on questions that were asked at the last meeting. Is there any follow-up that committee members would like?
I'm trying to open the. Oh, no, that's not it. I talked.
Renee, did you need access to a document? Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
Renee, you're on mute.
Sorry, Jordan, I'm good.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
I'm using two screens because I have a bigger screen that I can actually see.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
stay here.
Behind this one. Sorry.
Perfect.
I will chime in on the questions from the last meeting. For at least current numbers, there in our budget book, volume 1, I always refer to that. There's always so much information in there. We do have a table that identifies like elementary, secondary, and it has a breakdown of like teachers levels. It doesn't get into like how many first grade or 8th grade teachers, but there's some additional information there. And then, you know, for the sake of comparison, like, hey, based on the conversations that are happening now, how does that look like? That information still being processed. It's since we started these conversations, it's been an iterative process, and but that initial like outlook, hey, this current year, what does it look like? It's budget book volume 1, and we can find a page and follow up, because unless you really want to page through almost 300 pages, but we can save you some time.
Are there any other questions to be asked of staff before we move on? Part of this agenda item says, do you have any questions following last week's regular board meeting? I have a few, and but let's see whether any committee members have any.
And Roger, that that part is coming after the introduction of the letter from the
Oh,
executive
oh.
director.
Okay.
I know that this next part will be, I'm sure there will be questions. I just want to make
Okay.
sure we can sneak that in there before we move forward.
I'm probably not working off the revised agenda, Jordan, so.
Oh, okay. Let
So,
me, Roger, let me, do you, I'll put it in the chat.
okay, that's good.
Okay.
Oh goodness, it comes up, do I need access?
Oh, yeah, because you're on
Oh,
my
yeah,
computer.
here, I'll provide, that's right.
Okay,
Technical difficulties, it's all good. I'll open it up right now. There you go, you should have access.
should have access now. If you click on it. Here it comes.
There it is. So we'll do the agenda over there in the meeting over there.
Okay, I now have it. Thank you. Wife had to come in again. So we received a letter this last week from the executive director over at Mount Scout Learning Center. Last year, the committee and the board were concerned with the state's formula, which is less than what the district receives for an ordinary student in our classroom. And so adjustments were made to increase that formula by the board. And as I interpret the letter that we received this week, they're concerned that the announced cuts in the budget may affect a continuation of this funding, and I know that if that's a possibility, and whether the current board of directors are equally concerned that funding continue, it probably is best that we address it in our discussions about the budget. And as long as I'm talking at the board meeting, there seems to be a wide disparity between the testimony received or presented by the unions as to what available funds are coming from the state and what the district is projecting. And it seemed to be perturbing to directors based on what I heard them comment. We had one director saying that he thought we ought to lower our class sizes to 26 and that kind of stuff. And at the time, I also thought, well, that's desirable, but I don't know if we can afford it. Dr. Hollins also raised questions about our foreign travel costs and so on that are made available for and I suppose an expose and discussion might be warranted on that as well, Berto, because many of those trips, from my own experience of having a daughter go through the system, are self-funded by, you know, like for example, Franklin has a French class that's going to Paris over the spring break, and I spoke to this French teacher and said that individual students are paying their way, and for those who are find themselves short on ability to pay, they try to pungle up resources to make that possible and so on.
Fundraising.
The board discussion seemed to be limited at the moment for foreign travel associated with athletics, and I'm not so conversant with that, but I remember when my daughter was at Mount Tabor Middle School, the Japanese language people always funded the class to go to Japan, and that was part of their fundraising efforts and so on. So, and at that time there were adults in the neighborhood program that were concerned about the equity involved there. So anyway, it's a long-standing problem and discussion that's been going on for a number of years. So anyway, I'll shut up, and if anybody else want to ask a question or Berto, whenever you want to, you can chime in.
Well, reading this letter, my question is the district talking about using money from SIA account that was supposed to be Student Success Act money, that is supposed to be money for students of color and disabilities, et cetera, to help with the offset? Is that true?
So the student investment account, the SIA, so the short answer is yes, because the SIA allows for the usage of reducing class sizes in targeted areas. So when we look across our school system and we're looking at class sizes, there is that opportunity to leverage the SIA to support maintaining or reducing or keeping class sizes smaller. The critical component to that is that we submit a plan to ODE, and the plan has a narrative that discusses the specific aspects of the details. And so then once that plan gets approved by ODE, which they have, which includes the, I forget the exact terminology, if it like reduce class sizes or keep or maintain class sizes, it's something along those lines, the exact language that allows us to support like targeted schools and investments.
Okay, so you're using it for Title I schools.
Title, and there's other like historically underserved calculations. I don't have the entire calculations, but there's several other schools as well that benefit from the student investment account. It's something that we would have done this year. So it's not a new practice. It's something that have already done. This information then eventually gets uploaded to the state reviews it, reimburses us. So it's also a reimbursement grant. We submit our quarterly reports. And as we consider the current situation, that is part of the conversation of how can we continue to leverage the student investment account to find that right balance between maintaining class sizes, but then also supporting a variety of other programs that are part of the narrative, of the SIA
Okay.
narrative.
So Tom just
Yeah,
texted me.
and so-
Tom,
oh.
sorry, Renee. Tom is watching at home. And what he says is we're concerned that the CBO's SIA allocation will be reduced. So my understanding is that that SIA allocation is based on their service of the student groups identified in the SIA, right? So if they're continuing to serve houseless students, students of color, those other buckets that the SIA money is in, they should receive a fairly similar amount, or will their amount be reduced because we might pull their SIA money into other places?
Should that, yeah, so the calculation using the phrase ADMW, I lost it. Average daily, the weighted average daily membership.
Yeah.
So it's a specific number and weighted that's based on enrollment that determines the calculation for the funding that goes to our CBOs. So that formula is not changing. So the commitment's there to continue with the minimum funding that was calculated based on the formula. This past month, I believe, we're in March, or maybe 2 months ago, or fairly recent, there was an additional $1 million that was allocated to CBOs, and it was distributed via the same formula based on enrollment and need. And so now for this upcoming year, the current plan is working through leveraging the existing ADMW as the original calculation is determined.
I'm sorry, go back. What W?
So once, I just want to clarify, Renee, before we get to your question about ADMW. So what you're saying, Milberto, is the SAA money for the CBOs will be on the same formula as we've used in the past. So they may have a change in their SIA allocation depending on if their service population changes.
Correct.
Okay, and then ADMW, Renee, Noberto will explain that to you much better than I could. Sorry. I just wanted to make sure we landed on that CBO question for the CBOs. Okay.
I just have one thing I want to say, because I don't know for anyone else, but being new to this, everybody's throwing out a lot of acronyms, and I don't know if everyone here knows what all the acronyms mean. So if we can kind of explain that, so that way everybody can kind of get an understanding of what that is, just so that way everybody's on the same page. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. CBO, community-based organizations.
Oh, yeah.
And they are, Dr. Laurie, help me here, like alternative ed type of programs that alternative programs that support. I don't think it's just high school.
Supportive. Yeah, and supportive, like REAP, SEI.
Yeah, so our community-based organizations, the CBOs are schools that work with our students, PPS students, in a community-based school. And so we've helped, we give them money to support those students.
And ADMW is weighted average daily membership. So what does that mean?
Oh.
And what that means is, when we look at a student at the state coins the term ADMW, weighted average daily membership. And what it does is it looks at a student like one student, but then adds weight factors based on need or maybe language, there's disability. So then from a funding perspective, if it's like every student gets $1,000, like if this formula, let's say, for example, but a student has additional needs identified, their formula or the weight might go to 1.25, for example. So then it's 1,000 times 1.25. So it's an acknowledgement that there's additional needs that need to be met and therefore require additional resources. So that ADMW is the number the state calculates based on our demographics. And so then that ADMW is what's used to distribute the student investment account across the state. And we then use that same formula to distribute to community-based organization partners.
And can you define SIA? Because we were also using that.
Thank you. Yeah, you know, and I used to be much better at that. Student investment account.
Yeah, I know that.
And I was going to chime in and say the ADMW is based on figures that the district submits to the state in October based on its enrollments at that time. And that's what the state uses in allocating its appropriated funds.
Looks like Hobbs has a question.
Hobbs, yeah, I was going to say, Hobbs, do you have a question?
So you're talking about the CBOs, and you're talking about the formula that you use, but so I was just curious because I'm familiar with ADMW and just, I mean, I haven't actually seen the formula and I've looked for it. I wasn't able to find it, but that's not relevant to what I'm talking about. So you were talking about like the calculations, and sorry if you can hear my mom in the background. For like the CBOs, and it's the same for that like per student breakdown, right? If that makes sense. I was just curious, like, what is the formula for CBOs? Because like from what I'm understanding, it's like, okay, so here's the CBO, and they service this demographic, which might be like our students, a segment of our students. But then that's all that's registering for me. So like, how do we identify or determine how much money we need to allocate to the CBOs? Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, so for SIA, so there's so there's a general fund, and then there's student investment account, and I believe those are the two big funds that get distributed to CBOs, and they are two different calculations. So that's why I'm bringing it up. For the student investment account, that ADMW per student, or the rate per ADMW is determined at the state level. So the state will say, all right, based on all the need and enrollment across the state and the weighted enrollment, the weighted ADMW, it's $650 per ADMW. And then when we get that information, we then translate that to based on the CBO's enrollment and population, and it the calculation then translates to a dollar amount. So if there is ADMW for a CBO partner that's 1,000, then it would be 1,000 times the rate that the state sets at 650. So then that determines the funding formula for SIA, for the student investment account. With the general fund, that funding is determined by the net operating expenditure, NOE. And it's a more complicated formula that I'm not going to try to explain it, but what it does is it essentially calculates how much it costs for the district to invest in a student, and it takes 90% of that and passes it through, or takes 90% of that and gives that amount to the charter business, or community-based organizations. And that one is based on enrollment. So it's straight enrollment. It doesn't do ADMW.
So just so I can understand, so for the student investment account piece, the state ADMW is passed through to the CBOs.
It,
Or is it, or do it come to the school first and then allocated at that 90% rate?
So the 90% rate does not apply to the student investment account.
That's only from general funds.
Correct. That's just for the general funds.
And there's also a question from Alana in the chat. She said the algorithm for funding per child based on those should follow the student, correct?
For the funding child, those should follow the student, correct. That is for the student investment account. It does, and that's based on the need. And then for the general fund, it takes more of a global look across all expenditures and calculates a net operating expenditure. And then for the CBOs, it's 90% of that. And in the chat, I'm gonna post a document from the ODE website that shows Hobbs how the ADMW is calculated. So we can put that in our notes and agenda, and it shows like the different factors that are taken into account for the enrollment, students in pregnant and parenting programs, students in IEPs, students in poverty, and it then adds and calculates all the different factors there. So that will give you the formula. Oh, and it includes all, so it's a huge PDF, but you can find our district, either our district ID is 2180, so you can Control F and find 2180, or you can just look for Portland Public Schools. Somewhere towards the bottom, it's in alphabetical order by district.
Hobbs and the rest of the committee, basically the state funds for ordinary students and then adds additional funding for students that have special needs, English language learners, for example, SPED students, you know, and so on. SPED is special needs type of student. And so they pay more for those kinds of students and so on.
Yeah, and the ADMW, the weighted average daily membership, and how the funding also it uses like the same formula for charter schools. So in the document I put in the link, when you get to our extended ADMW, you'll notice that it also includes the charter ADMW in our numbers.
I just tried to open up the document and it's taking me to a 404 not found page. Is anybody else having that issue? All right.
Yeah, but yeah, thanks. Since I've learned about it, I like to think of ADMW as like an index almost, like how like different stocks and indexes are weighted. But yeah, I was just, I think you clarified.
That's a great way of thinking about it, and it's weighted, right? The dimensions and different factors are based on need. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you answered my question with this together. So thank you.
Okay, great. You're welcome.
So do we have some any other questions? Ilana, you're normally a fount of lots of questions, so.
That is true. I typically do have a lot of questions, but the questions that I have, I think, have been answered. Thank you, other folks, for asking questions. So thanks.
Berto, maybe you can tell us what you anticipate the board addressing at their work session next week. And then I'll draw the committee's attention to our work session with the board is on the 15th of March, which is a Tuesday, not our normal Thursday meeting date. And it is in person, if at all possible. And if the board hangs to their normal meeting time, it'll start at 6 o'clock But Jordan, I think, was trying to ascertain with the board that they were anticipating having a regular board meeting and then a work session, and whether or not they might start with the work session first and then go to their regular board meeting afterwards and so on. I can tell you at times when CBRC has been on the board's agenda with a designated time, like last year when we rendered our report, we were supposed to be on the agenda at 8:15 and we were on at 10:30. So
I will not, I'm in California on March 15th. Can I zoom in?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. And I did put out a request to the board office to just let us know what time. Because I paused to put it on the calendar until I knew exactly what time. I didn't want to just put the normal 5 to 7 because I'm not exactly sure what will happen. So I'm just waiting on that.
Okay.
okay, well, do we have any other questions?
I just want to say from my perspective as a board member, one of the really big questions that we're going to have to deal with in the coming months, and CBRC, this is a question for you all to really consider. So the board has made really clear that our agenda and priorities around Black and Native students. And, you know, one of the things that I think gave us all broken hearts was, you know, the fact that only 2% of our Black boys are on track by 5th grade on math. So we clearly are failing our Black students. And so one of the big questions is we're hearing from a lot of parents, especially at whiter, wealthier schools, about they're losing teachers. And one of the reasons we're seeing some of the cuts we are is partially because the strategy that Guadalupe and the senior staff, our academic staff, are following is to do targeted interventions. And what education research shows is that class size, unless you can get it down to about 15, is not actually a good indicator of student academic success. Smaller classes do have a huge impact on teacher well-being and on workload, and we know that, and that's really important. And if our goal is student outcomes, and if especially our goal is our Black and Brown, our Black and Native students, we are going to be, Guadalupe is going to be recommending strategies that do things like summer school, that do things like targeted interventions, where we put reading and math specialists into our CSI schools. And that may mean that Dunaway, which is a white higher SES school, only has 2 second grade classes instead of 3. And so these are some of the conversations that we as the CBRC are going to need to have. These are the conversations we as a board need to have, is if we really believe that Black Lives Matter, if we really believe that we need to do things differently as a district to close the opportunity gap for our Black and Native students, that is going to make some people uncomfortable. That is going to be really hard for some people to hear, that their student might be getting less. And we don't want to pit people against each other. We don't want it to be a zero-sum game, but there are only so many resources. And so we have to decide as a district, are we really going to invest in our Black students or not? And this moment of the teacher cuts, nobody wants to cut teachers, but we really have to be clear about what we're doing and why. And while small class sizes are super popular, if they don't actually significantly impact student success, then we really need to be clear about why we're making the choices we are about how we're using our funding. And so I hope that the folks on CBRC really think thoughtfully through what are the priorities of the district, especially around racial equity and social justice, and how do we live into that in this very critical moment.
Thank you for sharing that. That's spot on as to what the district policy is, and it's an announced objective. So
I had a really difficult conversation with a good friend the other day, and I was saying some stuff to her, and she said, well, but what about the white kids? And that was really hard to hear.
I have shared with Jordan recently, and I'll share again with the group. My father was recruited to the Portland Public School District when it was establishing the model school program. In those days, the district announced the student teacher ratio was 11-1 in those model schools. And my dad taught at Elliott, which is now the Harriet Tubman building. But his actual class sizes were more like 25 and 30, because factored into that formula of 11-1 was all the extra counselors, speech therapists, librarians, you name it. And also there's a difference in what you experience in a school like that. Oftentimes students are not parenting with their parents, or parenting with grandparents or foster parents, or somebody in the community and so on. And it's very difficult from a teacher's perspective of getting household supports and so on. So,
and I think we have Black families with two parents in the house and lots of supports, and just the daily grind of being disenfranchised via curriculum and systems and patterns. And I can't imagine what it's like to see police officers killing kids that look like you on the news. Or I know that like some of our Hispanic families live in fear around migration and being hassled by police around their migration status. So I think there are lots of reasons why some of our children show up with greater needs than others. And I think one of the narratives I've heard in Portland sometimes is, well, if their families were better, or if and I think we need to be really careful how we talk about our students, that this is not a failure of the Black family, or that our students aren't able to learn to read or can't do those things. I think our society is really broken, and our Black and Native students have been paying the price for our white supremacist society for far too long.
I don't disagree with any of the things you said. My purpose in sharing was what you experience from school to school will vary, and also to point out that many of the needs that we're encountering today have been there have been ongoing efforts for the last 50 years or better by the district. It's not like they've been sitting on their hands and all of a sudden decided that oh, this is a huge problem, we need to redirect resources or whatever. So this is an effort well worth continuing and working on. But so far, this district and any other district nationwide that I know of have not found the magic wand that solves everything.
So are we also talking?
Hey, Roger,
I can't hear. Who was that?
Alana, was that?
Okay.
yeah, but Renee was speaking first, so I stopped.
Well, I was asking, are we also talking about making sure teachers are trained to teach better? So I'm just going to give an example, a personal example. When I retired, I went to Fabian, and the 7th graders had holes in their math. So long story short, I was able to get an extra class, have 7th graders an extra class. That was their elective. I took over their elective to teach them things that they did not learn in elementary school. They didn't know fractions. A lot of them did not get fractions. They're going, I don't know, do I flip this to multiply? So teaching students what fractions are, you can touch and feel fractions. And if you touch and feel fractions, and I don't have anything here because I'm not a teacher anymore, but if you touch and feel them and play with them and use fraction kits or manipulatives, make up stories about them, you get it. Like it's not, I don't have to remember, do I multiply the numerator by the denominator? Oh, do I flip it first? No, understand what the fractions are and how it makes sense. And we have a lot of elementary school teachers who say, I hate math. So extra training in mathematics and reading and we don't, so that's where money should go to support our teachers. Our teachers didn't get the proper, you don't learn how to teach in school. I went to college. I did not learn how to teach math with my college degree. I had to go to math workshop. I didn't have to, but I went to math. I learned from other math teachers and et cetera. They don't teach you that in college. And I don't know if it's changed because, you know, I started teaching in '74. So I'm hoping things have improved. But I do know that at Fabian, those children did not understand fractions or percents. And when I was teaching, they said, well, nobody ever told me that. It's not that our kids can't learn. It's they have to have a teacher who's been properly trained to teach them the math and the reading. And those are the two things I can talk about. I can't talk about the science and all the other, but that I do know. So if we don't do something different to teach them, it doesn't matter how much money we give per child. So it doesn't matter how small or large the classroom is.
So I'm gonna piggyback a little bit on Mrs. Anderson's comments on that. And I think as we look at, you know, where the funding and stuff is going, one, I think we got to make sure we're clear on what we're going to do with the funding. I think that's one of the misinformation out there is because it's not necessarily clear on how we're going to be using this funding or why we're going to be doing this. Second thing too, I think it's a disconnect between when they talk about cutting teachers versus firing teachers. I think when normal people hear cutting teachers, they're thinking firing teacher, not necessarily relocating teachers to areas where they need to be at. So I think that has to be clear as well when we're talking about funding sources, right? When we talk about we're going to allocate more funds to a certain school, it's not that we're cutting kids, unless I'm wrong, but it's not that we're cutting teachers, we're just relocating them to schools that need them more. And also, you know, when we talk about training piece, you know, and I know this goes for, you know, our Black kids and our Hispanic kids as well, but and overall for all our kids, but our teachers have to know how to understand the kids that's coming into their classrooms. They have to know about their environment. You know, they have to know about what's going on in the community before you can teach a kid. You have to be able to reach that kid first before you can teach them. If you don't know that they're are dealing with gun violence in their neighborhoods or in their families, there's no way that they're going to come into a classroom and ready to do their ABCs and 1, 2, 3s by doing that. So when we talk about the training, is the overall comprehensive training that they need, and maybe that's where we put funding towards to say, okay, this is what they're going through, this is how we can reach them, and now we can teach them piece, right? And that goes into the same as far as bringing more teachers in that can relate to the students that's in that classroom as well. So they have that. One of the things that I learned when I was going to Whitaker in the 80s, and gang violence was really prevalent and drugs were really prevalent, I had Black teachers who understood what was going on in the neighborhood. So it was easy for them to redirect my actions because they knew where the basis of those actions was coming from. They understood that, you know, my mom was on drugs and, you know, I was living in hotels, but they understood that. So it wasn't so much about making sure I knew, you know, my history books or my math assignment. It was, how are you doing? How can we help you get around some of the issues that you're going to? Well, then it sparked me to really perform for them because they understood who I was and where I was coming from. So when we talk about training, we're talking about funding, when those dollars goes to those things, then I think we can really start seeing some changes. But I think also it's about being very clear and intentional when we're talking about the funding piece, that this is what we're doing. And I applaud Norberto's his speech or his explanation of the funding piece, but I was lost, right? And so, and then you have someone like the PAT who comes by and makes it really seem simplistic, right? I think what happens is that sometimes we get to over-explain what we're trying to do versus trying to make sure that everyone can understand it. And when I try to explain things to folks, I try to explain it like they're a kid. This is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. This is why we're doing it. And then I think that narrative changes, and it's not, oh, we're just cutting teachers like we're firing teachers. No, it's we are reallocating teachers here, we're reallocating teachers there. This is why, because this is our goals. This is what we're looking to do, and this is what we think is going to work.
I'll quickly just chime in, and Dr. Hollins, to use that to answer Roger's earlier question regarding next week's board session. That's what we're going to be focusing on. Yeah, we did get updated numbers from the state. We can share some quick numbers, but so then what do we want to do with the limited resources we have, and having some more details that of how do we support the whole child.
So
Well, I would also point out to Dr. Hollins that we are reallocating, but we're also eliminating some positions, at least unless there's been a stark change in funding, and that's why notices were required to be sent out, and that's required by law and by contract. And when I spoke to the union president at the last board meeting just this week, she wasn't aware of that. So yeah, and we've had 2 board meetings where the board meeting hall has been stacked with upset teachers.
So I'm going to interject real quick because Hobbs has been waiting quite a while to ask a question. So Hobbs, if you want to, and then Alana after Hobbs.
Actually, I was going to say thank you for that clarification, Mr. Roger. I actually was at the board meeting, and so something that I was hearing a lot was cutting teachers, but also from the board, but also from like the audience members. And so it's interesting that you bring that up, Mr. Holland, because I'm just curious why, if that's actually what's happening, then that like that's not in that's not the language that we're using around this. Because like what I said in the chat was like, when Nike says that they're cutting positions, that means that they're laying people off or maybe furloughing them, not reallocating them to a different department. So why isn't that said? And I actually understood that in our last meeting when we were talking about enrollment declining and like needing to reallocate classroom sizes and teachers for funding purposes. So I just was curious why that wasn't communicated. But I was also going to say, it doesn't really seem like everyone on the board though is that doesn't, I guess, understand this fully, because I was listening to what is his name, Andrew Scott, and he was talking for a while. He was talking about cutting teachers. So yeah, that was my one thing. That was my one question, and then I wanted to add a comment. I'm in alignment with what has been said about making sure that we're funding teachers so they have more support to teach students with more needs.
Ilana, did you have a question? You've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I actually, was wondering because folks were talking about like we don't know what actually helps potentially raise those rates. And I think that we can look at part of the Student Success Act actually to be brainstorming, probably not for this year because we already planned for this next year, but for future, to think through how we have 9th grade support counselors in our high schools. Why don't we could potentially have that in elementary schools to actually have those special touches that, Miss Renee was talking about, that I also heard Director Hobbs talking, or not Director Hobbs, but one day Director Hobbs, but Director Hollins talking about, having that extra touch, and it's somebody that they can trust. It's that relationships that's outside of the teacher relationship. So I would like to put that on the record as something to consider in the future.
Like EAs in every class, or people from the COBs.
And I do know that we've increased our social workers and counselors and mental health support staffs in a number of our high schools, but there's a lot more we need to do.
Just as a basic observation, at Franklin, there are 9 counselors on the sign-in sheet. And when I was in high school in 1961, Cleveland had 8, a man and a woman for each class. And that the Franklin's enrollment this fall was 2150. That's almost 500 more than what the building is designed for. So, also, every year that I've been on this committee, which is more than a decade now, there has been a request for additional PD, professional development time for teachers. COVID has diminished what's been allocated for PD to cover other needs, more emergent needs and so on. And so, we have a lack of substitutes, and some of that gets sacrificed to provide people to fill a class and that kind of stuff. And you'll have a math teacher having to sub in a Spanish class or things like that are misaligned, and there's lots of problems out there. And so we've got a lot of work ahead of us, and Berto, I look forward to the next work session of the board next week, and to our joint session with on the 15th. Clearly, I think, given the testimony received at the last 2 board meetings, there is a misconception as to what revenues are available, how are they being allocated, and I fear that there might be a tendency to look at, oh, there's another pot of gold that's still waiting to be expended next year, and its budget, and let's spend it now, and so on. And in my tenure, there's been glaring examples of districts that have done that and then end up having huge layoffs because the revenues weren't forthcoming from the state. And that's in large part why CBRC played a pivotal role in getting the board to adopt a policy regarding reserves, and we're tapping reserves this year again, but they need to also be restored. So anyway, I'll shut up. And are there any other questions that might be asked of staff before we define our next meeting and time and so on?
So when I brought this up at the board meeting, and I don't know if this is the spot here, but when we talk about equity and allocations for travel for our students. Is that something that we have, or we know what kind of budget we have for that, or can we carve out a budget or something like that for that? And the reason why I ask that is because of, you know, when we look at a lot of things that happen with the district and those schools that parents can go and raise funds, have the opportunity to do other things. Schools that do not have access to those funds don't even get the opportunity to participate in certain things. So I think that's something this group should start at least look at, is how do we allocate funds that we have? Because this is something that literally directly affects our kids, their physical, mental, emotional well-being, when they are able to be exposed to different learning opportunities outside of the classroom. They get to learn that the world is a lot bigger. They get to learn that learning just don't always have to take place inside of a classroom. So I think we need to really look at how we look at those funds as well.
I can only answer the question from my own experience with having two daughters go through the system. To the best of my knowledge, most of the foreign travel has been self-funded or funded by PTA contributions, foundation contributions. I'm not aware of the district having any funds that are dedicated for this purpose, but Berto can chime in and inform us about that. I'm fully engaged in wanting to explore the questions you've raised, Gary, and if equity is really a focus of this district, it's not been very equitable in the past.
Right, and that's actually what I was speaking to specifically, is that it's because it has been self-funding, it has been PTA and neighborhoods going out to raise funds, and I don't know if we have funds for that. But I guess what I'm asking is, can we ask for those funding so we can do that?
And I would say, Gary, this committee, CBRC, is to review the budget. So unless the items for travel are already in the budget, this group could say, we think there needs to be a budget allocation for travel, but this group isn't the one that makes the decisions about allocations. It's the one that reviews and could say, we think that this is an inequitable practice. I think the questions you're asking are really more for the audit committee and for the staff to respond to, but I think you're on, and I know the policy committee is also looking at what are our policies around travel and how do we make it more equitable. But I think this group can play that role of saying, we would like to see conversations about how we budget for travel so that it is equitable.
That's essentially also what we did on the CBO situation last go around. It wasn't directly our charge, and so we only made a recommendation. But Ailey is correct, and our task is to comment and analyze the proposed budget, and to look at the local option levy and make sure those funds are being appropriately allocated to teachers.
And before we call on Hobbs, I'll just chime in. Thinking about CBRC's role, so it's like thinking about that, and like I was hearing the commentary about additional professional development, and so like as we collect our notes and bring the feedback back, thinking about travel and the first thing that came to mind, I'm not well versed in what our travel policies may be, but that's the first thing that came to mind. It's like, oh, I wonder what policies we have regarding distributing funding for those purposes, and thinking what that could look like. But nonetheless, it's on the to-dos. So it's something that I can take back and just talk with other folks at staff as well to get a better sense of what that could look like. Hobbs.
I didn't have any questions or comments. I forgot to log on here.
Okay, well, to move us along, are there any other questions? If so, raise your hand. Um, I don't see any myself, but um, so does anyone have any comment they want to make for the good of the order? I'll make one. I would urge everybody who is a member of this committee to please attend the meetings. You've made a commitment and the district relies on that commitment. And I've served on this committee for over a decade and have only missed 4 meetings. So our next meeting, Jordan, you want to remind us when it is and the time, I believe it's the 15th of March, and you are in the process of learning where we'll fall on the agenda that night. So
Yeah, so the board work session is on the 15th. I am going to be sending out to everyone information on the time and then how they can engage with it. I do think that they'll have an opportunity to be in person, though if you cannot be, I will make sure that you have the ability to come in virtually. And then look out for that. Hopefully by tomorrow I can get a good answer back and then email you, but if not, look for it on Monday. And then the next regular committee meeting is the 31st of March.
okay, if there's nothing else to be addressed this evening, I'll call the meeting adjourned. We'll see you hopefully on the 15th. And if
Thank
at
you.
all possible, monitor what the board is up to on the next week.